luckily in 2009 or in 2010 when I moved to Tampa, I made the commitment. I'm like, I want to get to the UFC. The popularity of the UFC was on like the same path that I was on. Like I didn't even know if you could make a career out of the UFC, but week in and week out, the UFC got a little more popular. I got a little bit better. The UFC got more popular. I got more better. People started making more money. I kept on that path, on that path, on that path, where I just knew I'm like, just keep winning fights, keep training, don't party, don't waste any of this time, because I already knew it was against the
Clock
clock.
was ticking a bit.
I'm still
Yeah.
against the clock, right?
Yeah.
And so, luckily for me, it was motivating because I would go to a training session, and then Saturday would come around, and there'd be a big UFC fight, and then it was getting more popularity, and then I would have another fight, and then they would sign like the Reebok deal or the Fox deal, and I'm seeing all these things happening, and it was that was a big part of my motivation too, because I'm like, it's I kind of had that same vision that Dana White had, where it was like this: they have something special here. There's two people fighting. There's no rules. People love it. It's not like boxing where if you're a better boxer than me, you're gonna outbox me and beat me. It's like, okay, you're a better boxer than me. I'm gonna try to take you down. I'm gonna land a low kick on you. I'm gonna mix up my game, mix up my style. So I kind of had that same vision of when I started training, started watching the UFC, I was like, man, this is gonna blow up, and I'm gonna blow up. And sure enough, by the time I got in the UFC, they already did they already sold the UFC for like 4 point whatever billion.
Yep.
They're doing fights almost every weekend.
Yeah.
And I got in right at the perfect timing.
Yeah, you bring up a good point on that, because it's very refreshing to be in a sector business wise that's growing, because there's not a lot of other things that are growing at this rate, at the rate that the UFC has been growing. Like, I got into the UFC, and I remember a friend, that I worked with at ESPN. I just got laid off from ESPN. And I was just like, yeah, I got this opportunity with the UFC. And he's just like, man, that's perfect. He's like, they're about to take off. It's a good time. It's a good time for them. But you mentioned earlier that when you were on The Ultimate Fighter, thank God you didn't get in. But I bet at the time you wished you got in. How do you grapple with the mindset from when you're on the way? Like you said, it's a 9-year journey to get to the UFC for you. But I bet you felt like you were ready for 7 of those years, or like 6 of those years. How did you deal with that? Because that's really challenging when you think you're ready for something, but the rest of the world's telling you you're not yet, or hasn't given you the opportunity.
Yeah, and obviously my perspective changed completely, because in 2015 I was there in the house. I felt like I was good enough to win the whole show and to get in the UFC and start my path to becoming a star. Check that UFC goal off the list right then and there. And after they basically sent me a letter, tough break. They sent me a few bucks. I think it was like $500, and they're like, and it was. I still have the letter. We've talked about my vision board.
Yeah.
I still have the letter that they sent me that were like, you're not good enough yet, and it was heartbreaking. It was. I put everything I have into this, and they're like, just a simple letter. Hey, now tough break. You're not there yet. And I think a lot of people, they always ask me like, oh man, you didn't quit then. What kept you going? And I think a lot of that was I put everything I have into it already. So I really didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have like, oh, if this doesn't work out, go work for your dad or go work for whoever. I didn't have that. So it was, as heartbreaking as it was, I took the good from it. And the good was, all right, you were just on a TV show, you got some exposure, you got your ass kicked, but take what you want, take what you can from it. You just learned from, one of the best fighters ever, Uriah Faber. You were right there with Conor McGregor. You had dinner with Dana White. Take those opportunities and use it. Like, what happened in your fight? Okay, I fought a really big, strong wrestler. You better work on your strength and conditioning. You better work on your wrestling. You better work on all these things. And as heartbreaking as I was then, what I've come to realize at this point in my life, that one was a real tough one. And then a couple of years later, when I tore my ACL, again, it was the same feeling of like, this thing might not ever happen. This goal of yours, this thing that you set out for, this move to Tampa in 2010 might not ever work for you. And I thought about both the I always think about both those things now, and those were the two hardest things that I had to deal with now are probably the best things that ever happened to me from what I learned from it. Like the Ultimate Fighter, I took so many things away from it that I learned from it and built on and I'm at now. And the same thing with the torn ACL was, let's properly heal this the right way. And the first thing that I was able to do after the torn ACL was I was able to start boxing, and I just put all my effort. I'm like, all right, your jiu-jitsu and grappling's pretty good right now, but let's put a full year into just boxing and striking, and my striking got tremendously better from that. So the two worst things that happened to me ended up being the two best things that happened to me.
Yeah, I saw a phrase recently. It was from an actor. It was from Michael Caine, and he was saying the phrase that he learned on stage is use the difficulty. And it was some like improv scene where like he was supposed to walk into this room and there was a chair in the way. And then like he kind of froze up. He didn't really know what to do. And somebody else said, if it's a comedy, trip over it. If it's a drama, pick up the chair and slam it. Use the difficulty, like whether it's in whatever realm you can. And in life, you certainly can always use a difficult moment to grow from.